So thank you very much. Let's now move on to our next presentation. Professor Jerry Stoker, Professor of Governance at Southampton University and University researcher at the University of Canberra, Australia. Jerry?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to both visit your country and make a presentation to this conference. I hope that you find what I've got to say is of value. I decided that the best way to start my talk was to quote directly from the Vision 2030 document. This is a quotation which is just one sentence from page 64 of the document itself. And when I read that sentence, it came across very strongly to me that the complexity of the challenge that you're taking on is very significant indeed. And my main message is that that complexity of challenge needs to be understood, and it will probably require quite a range of subtle management techniques and methods and mechanisms in order to address the challenges that you've laid out for yourself in Vision 2030. Now, the quote that I put up is actually the one that Michael put up at the start of the presentation itself, and I think we both chose it because it's in capitals in the report, and we are sufficiently socially media savvy to know that when something is in capitals, it must be very important because people want you to pay attention to it. And basically it says, we are committed to managing our finances efficiently and effectively, and to creating agile public organizations, and to tracking both their own performance and that of the government overall. Now, that's just one sentence, but in that sentence it seems to me that you're asking quite a range of things to be done, because managing finances efficiently is one set of tasks, and perhaps particularly focuses on ensuring value for money, but also perhaps avoiding corruption. Managing finances effectively means that they actually achieve the goals that you set for them, and that relates very strongly to some of the material that Stephen was talking about in his presentation. But more than that, you talk about, after that, creating agile public organizations. Those are, I assume, organizations that are capable of being innovative and of creating new solutions to some of the problems that you face. And then you talk about tracking the performance of both those organizations and government performance overall. So the performance of an organization, as Stephen said, is actually a complex challenge in itself to measure, but the measurement of the government's performance overall, so do governments overall provide good services to people who are looking for a job, for example? And that might involve a range of different agencies in terms of achieving that overall objective. How can you actually measure a performance against those kinds of goals? Or to be more specific about the implications of that complexity for the audit role, clearly in some ways part of managing efficiency is about performing a part of the security role, which is a classic in terms of trying to deal with the issues of corruption, clearly a major concern and theme. Efficiency and effectiveness are also strong goals within the Vision document, and they too are of constant interest to people involved in audit, but they're less about tackling corruption, they're more about improving administration and improving the quality of service delivery. But if you then add in the idea that you not only want services to be delivered well, but you want them to be delivered differently, that is, you want innovative and agile public organizations, you've given yourself a further and more substantial challenge. And then if you argue, as the Vision document does argue, that actually what you want to do is develop a more holistic approach to government, a joined up capacity, so the different arms of government can actually deal with individuals or with problems in society in a coordinated way, If you're trying to achieve that kind of governance, then you're dealing with problems in the round, but that still too is more challenging. So I think the first and major point I'm trying to get across is that the vision that's in the 2030 document is a very substantial vision. Let me reinforce that point by just simply lifting out a few more quotations from the document itself, a few more parts of the vision itself. The first is engaging citizens with interactive, online and smart forms of engagement. The second is improving the quality of public services to meet the needs of citizens. The third is to develop an evidence-based approach to the way in which you develop your policy and your management. I am an absolutely strong supporter of all three of those goals. I personally have written both books and multiple articles on those issues. There is a huge amount of research, knowledge, and understanding out there about those issues, but they too add to the scale of challenge which seems to me is embedded within the 2030 document. So my initial punchline is that I find the 2030 document is full of incredibly laudable aims, but what I'm emphasizing over and over again is the scale of ambition of the agenda that you've set for yourself. So now the last and the second part of my talk turns to the issue of, well, how could we begin to address the scale of ambition that's in the Vision 2030 document? And I think I want to particularly talk about the role of audit functions in enabling those challenges to be met, given the nature of the audience that I've got in front of me. And basically, I think that many of the classic ways of doing audit could perform very powerful and important functions in helping the delivery of Vision 2030. And many of those classic ways of dealing with issues of corruption or ensuring that money is effectively spent well fit within the classic public administration ways of thinking. And in this room, I imagine everyone is familiar with the main general principles of public administration that have been practiced in many countries for the last centuries. And the classics are: you install a set of rules, you instill commitment to those rules, you support through training and skill development staff so that they can carry out their duties, you exercise oversight over staff, and you punish offenders. Those are the classic mechanisms of installing effective organisation using the classic rules of public administration. But the Vision 2030 calls for agile public organisations that are capable of empowering citizens by engaging with citizens in different ways. And that seems to me to require a very different approach to audit. First of all, because it's not necessarily about enforcing rules or imposing discipline. It's actually about trying to encourage learning and the sharing of best practice. And the dynamic that's required to encourage that process of learning or gaining an understanding of what is best practice is very different to the dynamic of enforcing rules. To achieve the kinds of ambitions that are laid out in the Vision 2030 document, it's about encouraging entrepreneurship within public services so that people can trial innovations or trial different ways of doing things. So it's not about always insisting that your managers follow the rules. What you want them to do is to actually invent new ways of tackling the problems that people in Saudi society are facing. Ultimately, given the vision involved in the 2030 document, it means committing yourself to what's often referred to as co-design, or co-production with citizens. It's about working directly with citizens on what they would regard and what they can see as potential effective solutions to the challenges they face. So to exaggerate a little, it's a very different set of dynamics to the dynamics of classic public administration. It's less about sticking to the rules and more about crossing boundaries to join up, crossing boundaries between public and private sector, crossing boundaries within the public sector, and crossing boundaries between the public sector and citizens directly themselves. So I want to emphasize that in order to achieve the full ambition in Vision 2030, there is a kind of different set of management challenges to those of classic public administration. As I indicate in this slide, whatever it is that's required to deliver this innovative, agile form of public organisation that is capable of reaching out and working directly with citizens, it's not going to be driven by the rules of classic public administration. Now, within the debate around governance over the last 30 years, I think we've seen several core alternatives offered to the classic rules of public administration. One of them is new public management, which is based largely on trying to learn from business and market-based principles. Another is called public value management, which is, I think, about trying to encourage a process of partnership and network working within public services. There's a third and more recent one, which is about trying to use the advantages of the digital age and digital technology to improve the quality of management and governance. And the fourth, which has, I think, become very popular in many countries over the last 10 years, is a commitment to the design principles, where you work directly with citizens on designing better services and you rely on very rapid feedback from them in order to improve those services as you go forward. These are, in other words, other schools of management and governance thought which need to be taken into account if the vision of 2030 is going to be delivered. So, to sum up, it seems to me that the governance challenge that you face is to combine the strengths of classical public administration, because you need that to tackle issues of corruption and you need that to tackle some of the basic delivery of public services, but you also need other forms of management and governance. And these are the ones that will deliver that capacity for innovation, for risk-taking, for opening up, and to work in partnership with others. And this is the dilemma, which is you actually need them both. You can't say, oh, we'll just have public administration, or you can't say, oh, we'll just have these new forms of management. You actually need them both. You both need the classic public management and some of the new management mechanisms and management tools that I've spoken about. And this leads me to the final issue, which is, can such a form of practice be developed within one organisation? For example, could it be developed within the General Auditing Bureau? Could you actually have one institution that was aimed at trying to encourage both fulfilment of effective classic public administration rules and at the same time encourage this innovative, dynamic form of public service, which is also part of the 2030 vision? It seems to me that the advantages of having the two types of management within one organisation is it gives a very strong impetus to reform, because to achieve the vision of 2030, as I've emphasised several times, you're going to need both forms of governance or management, and it would provide a very holistic approach to improvement. The disadvantages are that some of the classic functions of control, which are associated with audit, but also with classic public administration, might not sit very well with encouraging people to innovate and think differently and take risks and work with partners and operate in a way that enables them to open out to citizens. And the danger is you might end up with neither of the tasks being done particularly well. I'm afraid that's the end of any useful advice that I'm about to give you, because I'm not going to jump one way or the other, but it seems to me that what I've hopefully tried to do is lay out what I think the challenge that emerged from me from reading the truly excellent 2030 document. Thanks very much for listening.
So I think that was sufficiently straightforward that I probably don't need to add anything to it. Nevertheless, it seems to me worth perhaps pointing out that, from a historical perspective, audit agencies may have had, years ago, had the advantage that there were not strongly competing ideas of good management at the time they developed. So that you could develop an approach to auditing that went along with what everyone at the time believed was the basis of good management. Well, we're in a different point in history, and you have multiple competing views of good management and good public management, and it looks like it would be challenging to pick one over another. And yet, we also know that if you aren't selective about the very ideas that you're going to be committed to, it's going to be hard to build up strong capacity to do that. So I think, in a way, we have a distinction in our literature between two kinds of problems. One is a tame problem, and another is a wicked problem. And the wicked problems don't admit of such clear solutions. And I think we could sum this up by saying Saudi Vision 2030 has handed you a wicked problem, and that's going to require choices, and no one is ever going to be fully happy with the outcome. I think that's and that's the end of our useful advice, as my colleague said. Though I think you can sharpen up the challenges as time goes on.